Of policy activity in the House of Representatives, and I want to thank each of you for being here. I want to thank the committee members, and today is Big Staff Thank You Day, so staff, thank you very much for putting up with us for at least yet another day. Today we're here to consider H.R. 5, the Student Success Act. This very important piece of legislation reduces the federal government's footprints in our nation's classrooms and empowers local communities to lead the way in fixing America's educational system. The lessons of No Child Left Behind are clear, and that is, it is time to transfer the responsibility of educating our children back to the states and our local school districts. We know that state and local governments can and do make better decisions for their students, parents, teachers, and administrators than we can and do in Washington. This bill helps accomplish exactly that by restoring local control, supporting effective teachers, and empowering parents. It's time for Congress to play its constitutional role in determining our national education policies, and that should be we allow people back home to make more decisions in not only their success, but the empowerment for the future of their children. Just like we saw in our hearing yesterday, President Obama has been engaging in selective enforcement of a law. Because No Child Left Behind has never been reauthorized since 2007, the Obama administration has been free to provide waivers to states for certain requirements. The administration has also created its own requirements for other states. By eliminating this piecemeal approach that attempts to fix problems in the short term, perhaps creating longer other problems as a result of that, H.R. 5 is a long-term viable approach to an education policy. This bill also eliminates wasteful and duplicative federal programs and promotes a more appropriate federal role in education policy. It rewards successful teachers who play a vital role in the future of our children. As a father and as a taxpayer, and certainly as a person who is interested in local schools working well, I can tell you that I've watched my two boys in their education process, and while I am not an education expert, I can tell you that the schools that I've been associated with in Texas fall across the gamut. Some were very good schools, and some were schools that needed more resources, but every single one of them needed parental involvement, local control, and the ability to solve their own problems. And many times I found, especially in dealing with the disability angle of one of my sons, it was not easily accomplished because of the myriad of rules and regulations. I felt like sometimes that were there to protect me, and other times there to harm my ability to gather my son the education needs that he would need. I understand that we don't all agree on an educational approach, but I will tell you that one approach that I do believe is forthright, and that is John Klein and his role that he has taken in working with not just legislators and members who have a great background, but more importantly, teachers and parents who back home want to take control of their education and be responsible for it. So I'm delighted that you are here today. I applaud the work that you are doing. I know Mr. Miller will be here in a few minutes. He indicated that he is in a leadership meeting downstairs and will be up as quickly as possible. So we're going to get started by unanimous consent from our friends that are Democrats in the room. With that said, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts for any opening statement he may wish to make. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we should just proceed with the testimony, but I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am delighted, Mr. Chairman, that you're here without objection. Anything that you have in writing will be entered into the record. This committee has taken a good bit of feedback from all of the members. I'm sure we've all been talked about amendments that were made. I think that really points to the fact that all of us have in mind our ideas of education. The facts of the case are it's going to be done with this body through your leadership. Delighted that you're here. The gentleman is recognized now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you and to the members. I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 5, the Student Success Act, and following up on your gracious offer, I'll submit my written testimony for the record and hit some points here. For more than a decade now, No Child Left Behind has been the law of the land. The law was a result of a well-intended effort to close achievement gaps and improve the educational outcomes of students. However, in the years since the law was enacted, we've learned a one-size-fits-all accountability system has made it more difficult for State and local leaders to accurately measure and improve student learning. The Federal bureaucracy has grown to more than 80 programs tied to K-12 classrooms, burying schools under a mountain of red tape. Antiquated rules value tenure and credentials above a teacher's ability to actually teach, and student achievement remains flat. To make matters worse, in 2011, the Obama administration began issuing temporary conditional waivers to States in exchange for adopting its preferred education reforms. More spending and more Federal intervention are not delivering enough progress in student learning. Congress must reauthorize the law and fix the mistakes of the past. The Student Success Act embodies 4 principles vital to a stronger education system in which all students have the opportunity to succeed. First, we must reduce the Federal footprint in our nation's classrooms. This bill eliminates more than 70 duplicative and ineffective programs and creates a new local academic flexible grant that will support education priorities set by local leaders. Furthermore, the legislation reins in the authority of the Secretary of Education, ending the practice of coercing States into adopting the Secretary's education agenda. Second, we must restore local control to our State and local education leaders. H.R. 5 repeals the onerous Federal accountability system and frees States to implement an accountability system tailored to the needs of their schools, as well as develop their own policies to improve failing schools. Third, to improve the quality of education in our classrooms, we must support better teachers. The legislation will shift the focus away from credentials and tenure to State or district-led strategies that will help parents know whether their school's educators are getting the job done. Finally, to help students succeed, we must empower parents. The Student Success Act will reauthorize and strengthen the charter school program, maintain support for the magnet school program, and allow school districts to take advantage of the free tutoring and greater options for public school choice. These and other positive reforms in H.R. 5 are essential to fixing a broken system. Continuing the status quo is simply not an option. The American people have been waiting for Congress to act for more than 5 years. It's time to move forward. I encourage the committee to support the Student Success Act and a structured rule for its consideration on the House floor. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. We're still recognizing that the gentleman, Mr. Miller, has not arrived yet. I would encourage my colleagues, based upon the premise that we're going to recognize that when he does come in, I will interrupt whichever member that is, and ask that we give consent. Let Mr. Miller make his opening statement at that time, and if that's okay, we will proceed with that understanding. Thank you very much. We'll proceed with that understanding. Mr. Klein, I see a lot of amendments that have been presented. And there was obviously a vigorous hearings that have taken place on this issue. And I gather that after reading pieces of the bill and looking at it, that you've just taken a lot of testimony, heard from a lot of people, and you're trying to play things that are in the best interest of giving education the best ability to be done. The reason why I say this is I look at the amendments, and they're really one way or another trying to pick winners and losers.
Right.
Do you want to take a second and just address that issue with me? Because I think you've done a heck of a job to find, I don't know whether it's the midpoint or the best point, but that's just my assessment. Am I wrong?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been working this legislation for some time. As the Chairman may recall, We moved very similar legislation in 3 separate bills in the last Congress, 112th Congress. The charter school bill, which is now a portion of this bill, passed overwhelmingly in the House, a very strong bipartisan vote. But as we move forward into this Congress, we've taken that legislation, we've had more hearings and more input and talked to more colleagues and more experts, and we've made some refinements. And Mr. Chairman, I think you put your finger on it. A lot of times somebody will have a really good suggestion, and they're looking at it from the vantage point of their district and their schools, and it may work out for them, and it's at the expense of somebody else. So it's very, very hard to balance these formula programs, to try to get them to come out right. We think we have struck the right balance. We think we have a really good bill here. I know there are some people with other ideas, and some amendments which you may make in order may make it better. But I think that's a debate that we're looking forward to tomorrow, the next day, or whenever this bill comes up.
As a member of Congress who is deeply involved in a number of disability issues, up to and including the Down Syndrome Caucus and others, I remain concerned about the ability that a parent has to effectively work well with a school system who I recognize is not always ably in the capacity to make great progress. And I wonder if you could talk with me a minute about your ideas about the state of education for disabled students in this country and how you believe this bill will get closer to a better understanding that I would call a national consciousness or recognition about how important these students are to education also.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I should start with a refrain I've been using since the day I walked in here. I'm pretty sure the day I walked in here, or maybe Mr. Bishop can remind me. But it seems to me that one of the failings of this Congress and this administration and the previous administration is the unwillingness to step up to the pledge, if you will, the requirement that the Federal Government is supposed to provide 40% of the funding for special education, the excess funding required under IDEA. We've never done it, Mr. Chairman. We almost got to 20%, about 5 years ago, and we've been sliding down ever since. Plenty of blame to go around. This isn't a Republican and Democrat thing. Administrations, both of them have since I've been here in my time, have failed to address that. We should set that as a priority and not bring in additional programs that may be, again, well-intended, but which will also be chronically underfunded until we meet that first commitment. So that's my first view, and that's not what this bill is. That's IDEA. In this bill, we recognize that it is important to parents and to students with special needs to be tested and for parents to have that information. We also recognize that in some cases, you need an alternative approach. The current law allows that. We think it is a little bit too restrictive in prohibiting teachers, special education teachers and others from recognizing that some students are simply not going to be close to grade level. And so we make an adjustment in this law to lift the caps on the number of students that can receive that alternative testing. We think that's the right thing to do. There are others that disagree, but I think the weight of the evidence says that provides the best education for those students.
Do you believe in any way that would be trying to shift, to give power to one side or the other, that meaning give the school system an upper hand against a parent and the best wishes?
I don't think so. The law still requires testing. An IDEA, which is a separate, some interlocking law, has very specific requirements in there. Individual programs have to be developed under that law. So I don't believe that to be the case. But, I mean, fundamentally, let's recognize what we're talking about here. With this law and with this approach, we believe that the decisions are best made by parents and teachers and principals and superintendents and local school boards rather than us trying to fit them in the box. I think that's the problem that No Child Left Behind ran into. Clearly, the intentions of that law were good. It passed before I got here, but I don't know anybody who thinks it's a good idea to leave any child behind. But it just got itself caught up into an unworkable system that all of our constituents have talked to us and said, this AYP thing has got to go. Our schools are going to be failing. We can't comply with this thing. So I think that's the approach we're taking. It's very clear that our approach, while insisting on accountability, is giving the decision-making to the local level, and I believe that's where it belongs.
Well, I appreciate your constant viewpoint of considering not just new ideas, but ideas that work. And I will, as you are well aware, and my conference is well aware, I will continue to stand up and insist that we address the issues. I don't think it has to be my answer, but I think it does have to be our answer. And I am delighted, quite honestly, not only with your forthrightness, but the desire that you have to listen to members, and I applaud you for what you've done. Now, with that said, this is like Murderer's Row because you're going to get a doctor of education next. I wish you good luck. We now defer to the gentlewoman, Dr. Virginia Fox, the gentlewoman, the Vice Chairman of the committee. Gentlewoman is recognized.
I have no idea what you all are talking about. I don't have a lot of questions. I don't have any questions of the chairman. I have a lot of compliments, though. I first want to compliment the staff that's here. I think the chairman mentioned earlier that we needed to thank our staff. I now understand why when members in years past have gotten up and so profusely thanked the staff for their work, having worked with this staff for the last 2.5 years, I really have come to appreciate the hard work that they do and the dedication that they bring to their jobs. So I want to say thank you to them because all the bills I've worked with on the staff, they've done a terrific job. So I want to thank them. I want to also echo some of the comments that the chairman has made, the chairman of the Rules Committee, on the need for us to continue to work on this legislation to make sure parents have as much control as they possibly can have. Having served on a school board, having served as a university administrator and a community college president, I've been steeped in education all my life, and so I've seen the best and the worst out in the field. This is not a perfect bill, and the chairman admits that. I think most everybody does. Everybody's heard me say if I had my way about it, the federal government wouldn't be involved in education in any fashion. But it's not a perfect world, and I'm not in control. And so I think this is moving it in the right direction, more local control, less control at the federal level. So I think we're going in the right direction. And last, I'll just compliment the chairman. I think for someone who's not had a background in education formally, but came in and chaired the committee, I think he's done a terrific job. So I thank him, I thank the staff, and I'll look forward to, I think I look forward to handling the rule tomorrow. I hope. Thank you.
Can I say I thank the gentlelady and echo her comments on the staff?
I thank the gentlewoman. I think you got off easy. There are some that have been incapable of achieving that in the past, and so good for you. I thank the gentlewoman not only for her comments, but I want to reinforce the staff on both sides of this committee, Republican and Democrat, and also of your committee, including Mr. Miller's staff, I know have received a great deal of feedback, and I really applaud them for not only trying to work together, and I'm going to mention something else, and the parliamentarian's office, who has spent an excessive amount of time with every one of our members working well. I'll write them a note and thank them, but I want to do that now publicly also. And I thank you most sincerely, Mr. Chairman, for the way your staff and Mr. Miller's staff has come about this process. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Klein for his testimony. And, my teachers and my principals and my superintendents, over the years when they've talked about No Child Left Behind, one of their biggest complaints was that we asked them to do all kinds of things and never provided the funding for them to do it. Not that the things we asked, were bad. They believe in excellence. They believe in high standards. But they thought that we were going to actually support them with funds, so they wouldn't have to, rob Peter to pay Paul to be able to implement the federal mandates. And so, I think what I've heard from my teachers was, and my principals and my superintendents, was they wanted more flexibility. They liked the high standards, but they also needed some more support in terms of funding. And the bill that you have before us here today, and I guess this kind of represents a philosophical divide, probably between Democrats and Republicans. But having said that, you've done something that I think is pretty unique. You have a bill here that has united groups from all different political perspectives in opposition. So we've got everything from the NAACP, the National Council of La Raza, the National Education Association, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights are all against it. So is the Business Roundtable. So is the Chamber of Commerce is against this bill. And part of the reasons why a lot of these business groups are against the bill is because they believe that we need a well-educated workforce to be able to take the jobs that are coming down the road in the decades ahead. And they worry that we're not preparing a workforce of sufficient quality to be able to get those jobs. So, you've got, from a wide spectrum here, enormous opposition to this bill. And, your bill locks in sequester funding levels and doesn't allow for adjustments for inflation. I really do think education is worth investing in. We talk about STEM education all the time. This bill removes dedicated funding streams for science, technology, engineering, and math education. Despite the intense need for students to be globally competitive in STEM fields, we get STEM caucuses here. We all talk about how we need to help our schools focus on STEM. Literacy is a basic requirement for any job, not only in this country but around the world now. And America's 15-year-olds are currently ranked 14th in reading among developed nations. Does anyone really think that it's wise to eliminate dedicated funding for literacy programs, given that fact? I go on and on and on, but I don't think that this bill is, from my perspective, as it is written, is fixable through amendments. People will offer amendments, and I hope that there's great latitude in allowing as many people who want to offer amendments as possible. But I just close with this. I remember when the original No Child Left Behind bill was discussed and debated. It really was genuinely a bipartisan effort, and this doesn't seem like that to me. Maybe Mr. Miller will correct me when he gets here, but I do think that when we talk about rewriting our education laws, that it is an important enough subject where you should have more consensus, and there ought to be more bipartisanship, and that means more than just allowing people to offer amendments in committee and then vote them down. It means kind of coming to some understanding on some of these issues. But I really worry about the future of this country if we don't get our education system right, and that includes not just providing flexibility. It also includes insisting on high standards, and it also includes on making sure that our local communities have the funding to be able to do what they need. And I also want to associate myself with the chairman of the Rules Committee and the IDEA funding. You're right. Democrats and Republicans both have kind of ignored this issue for a very, very, very long time. It's a huge deal, especially in small towns. We can say all we want that it's too bad that we promised 40%, but we're not quite up to 20%. But, we have the ability and the responsibility, I believe, to change that if we want to. And so I hope at some point we address that issue. But again, I thank you for coming. I have great respect for the gentleman, but I think, from my perspective, this is a bad bill, and I suspect that you're going to probably get a party line vote, by and large, on the House floor, which I regret, because I really do think that there should be more of a bipartisan effort. And having said that, I thank the Chairman for the time. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much, and would defer now to our second educator in Murderers Row, the gentleman from Utah, the gentleman, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's two jokes I was going to do. Let's bypass them right away. Glad to have you here, Mr. Klein. I have to admit, over the weekend, I did try to read this novel. Unfortunately, and this is where I hope our staff is here and listening, and Mr. Webster, you'll remember this. Reading this bill, because it's written in congressional legislative ease, you have to have a law book, a law clerk, and a Rosetta Stone to understand what the hell it actually says, which is why we need to make sure that we have the Ramsey rules so that we can do what most legislative bodies in the world do. So you can see what it was and what it will be, and you can make a comparison between the two of them. It has nothing to do with your committee. That's our committee, and why that Ramsey rule has to go forward, and we have to insist ledge research start doing it in that way. I am actually severely troubled by the bill because you have put me in a very difficult situation. I realize you don't care, but you have put me in a difficult situation. My predecessor, Jim Hansen, said that if you had a racehorse that won 7 out of 10 races, you don't shoot him for the 3 he lost. This is a bill that has clearly won 7 out of 10 races. I mean, this is far better than the status quo. It is far superior to No Child Left Behind, which I would remind my colleagues here, No Child Left Behind was a bipartisan bill where the House, the Senate, and the President all came together to pass crap. In fact, it was Gene McCarthy from your state, the former senator, used to say that most accidents take place in the middle of the road. So sometimes we're not necessarily that well off. There are some parts of this bill that are so good, you and the committee deserve to be kissed on the lips for how good they are. Not by me, but somebody needs to do that. However, the 3 races you lost, the race is over and you're still in the starting gate with it, which means the concept of federalism is important. I realize in Washington, most people, you say federalism and their eyes will glaze over. That's the essay in high school you didn't write. But to me, it becomes significant that when the Founding Fathers got together, they actually came up with a system that will never work. And we call it dual sovereignty. So they actually had the gall to go against the Bible that says you can't have 2 masters and say there will be a national government and a state, and they both have sovereignty, and you need to be loyal to both of them. James Wilson at that convention said this system will work out brilliantly if both bodies act like the solar system and stay in their own spheres, and they complement one another without ever contradicting one another. But his fear was that one of them would act like a comet and simply take off on its own trajectory without rhyme or reason to it and smash into anything that was in its wake, leaving chaos to take place. That's one of the concepts and problems that I have. So the concept of federalism simply means that we need to allow local governments, states specifically, to make choices for themselves. And one of the problems we all have, especially in Washington, is the tendency of wanting to make them make the proper choice. The bottom line is federalism means people can make wrong choices, and that's okay. And we have to learn to discipline ourselves to make sure that does not take place. Most of your bill does that. Some of the parts of the bill, I do have some problems with it. And so I'd like to ask some specific questions simply to understand what the words actually mean that are in this particular bill. Years before you were chairman, there was another version of a potential change to No Child Left Behind, ECS. And I was reading through that one again, another wonderful opportunity for boredom. And they had a program in there that was going to be a career ladder program for Title I schools. Having dealt with career ladders, I went to the staff at that time and said, what do you mean by a career ladder program for Title I schools? And they had the nice They were nice enough to tell me they really didn't know. It's just something that one of the advocacy groups had put forward, and it sounded really good, so they put it in the working draft. I want to make sure we don't have some of those in there. So, in one of the sections of this particular bill, you talk about professional development for teachers. There are 6 subcategories, but you list them all and say they will be there such as these 6 groups, these 6 things. What is the legal definition of such as? Does that mean you have to do all of them, some of them, part of them? Can you do an alternative to any of them?
I don't have the section in front of me, Mr. Bishop, but such as would be a not all-inclusive list.
It is?
Not all-inclusive. That's the way I would read that.
So you can pick and choose. That's the way it means, to pick and choose in this group.
Pick and choose.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is actually the professional development for teachers and school leaders that is evidence-based, job-embedded, and continuous, such as, then you go 1 through 6.
Mm-hmm.
Who determines if they are okay to get the funds based on which ones they pick?
They're going to get the funds. The Federal Government can't decide.
So all they have to do is pick one of them.
Federal Government's not going to decide whether they get it or not.
Okay, so a state has to just pick one of those. Can they do an alternative that is similar to it?
At the end of the day, because of the way it's written, I believe that's correct. I will turn to the aforementioned fantastic staff. Yeah, right. Yeah. Right, so they don't have to do, well, they have, right, right. Locally decided.
So they don't have to do all of them?
No.
Do they have to do any of them?
No, it's the same.
They don't have to
Same
do
answer.
any of them?
Same answer.
So why do you have the list in there in the first place?
To suggest to them what might be a good idea.
Later on, you use the word including and including initiatives that provide. Is that the same definition on those lists?
No, I'm not sure what you're talking about, but if you're looking at, say, teacher evaluations, when you say you're including groups and you're including teachers and parents, that's who you have to include.
All right, then let me give you, it's developing and implementing initiatives to assist in recruiting, hiring, retraining highly effective teachers, including initiatives that provide, and then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Would the gentleman yield for just a second?
Sure.
Could you tell us what section you're talking about? Because we're sitting over here clueless.
I wish I could. It's
Thank you.
section. This one is 2222, which is going too far.
You're making that up.
No, it's actually 2222, and it's A on this one. The other one, the such as, I ripped the page off. I don't know where I am. I'm sorry. I was at home, and I couldn't afford to print the entire bill out.
That would be on page 506.
We've got it here.
If the gentleman allow a little bit of help here, it's in this report. What might be, the gentleman, Mr. French, has advised me, page 506. 506.
So including means?
So I'm looking at a different page, 283.
Gentleman, you'll just, well, please, if the clerk will please take this to the chairman. If we'll suspend.
But in general, may
Gentleman,
include means
suspend
may.
Just a moment, please. As the gentleman's prepared, a gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman, Mr. Bishop, is recognized with the time.
So we determined including means, and the words including.
The key word is may include, not must include. I'm reading now on page 506 of the printed version and page 283, section 2222. May include, among other programs and activities, develop and implementing initiatives to assist in recruiting, hiring, so forth. It's may include, not must include.
Okay, but the one I'm looking at doesn't have either of those words in there, so I'm taking your word that we're doing that. Let me move on and come back to some other definitions of things. One of the criticisms of this bill is portability of Title I funds. I know I have an amendment, Mr. Salmon has an amendment, Eric Cantor has an amendment. They are slightly different in their patterns, but they all have some kind of portability approach to those funds. Why did the committee not do any portability in the legislation?
If you have portability of your Title I funds, the idea is the money follows the child, which is a pretty good idea. This, again, is one of those winners and losers deals. So if you're a school that is currently a Title I school, you've got a large number of poor kids, Title I kids, the district designates you a Title I school and the money goes to that school. If you only have 2 or 3 or 4, you don't get the money. So this change, the portability, would allow that smaller school to get the money, but it takes away from the large urban school. It's a winners and losers thing, and we just didn't include that battle.
All right. That's legitimate rationale. Don't know if I agree with it, but it is a legitimate rationale.
It was not easily reached.
There is another provision in here that I was reading on some page in there you'll want to find that surprised me, and this deals with the state allocations. And tell me I'm wrong in reading this, but it says in general, subject to paragraph 2 through 5, if a state does not apply to the Secretary for an allotment under this section, a local education agency located in such state may apply to the Secretary for a portion of the funds that would have been allotted to the state had the state applied for the allotment under this section.
2225.
Does this really mean that a local school district can circumvent the state and make application to the federal agency, the federal government, and get away with it? It also says later on, that's in number 1. In number 4, it says that if they do their reporting, their reports would be submitted to the Secretary and not a state education agency. Are we really putting in here language that allows local entities, local school districts to circumvent the states?
If the state does not apply. Right.
We want to do that. So let me go through a scenario here. Let's say a state finally realizes they've had it with the Federal Department of Education. They are tired of having 7% of their funds coming from the department and having to have 100% of all the damn regulations coming from it. So they simply say, we're going to cut it off. We are not going to accept any funds. The state decides that, and a local school district can now circumvent that and go to the Federal Department of Education and apply for a grant.
Under this provision, if the state doesn't apply for an allotment,
Yeah.
doesn't say they're not taking any federal funds, they're not applying for an allotment because they don't want to, whatever reason, the local district, the local school board could do that under this paragraph.
All right, and that to me is, once again, extremely troubling. We have a relationship with states. We don't have a relationship with local governments that are truly created by the states. States are unitary. Now, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to suspend? I do have a couple more questions.
In fact, I would ask that the gentleman suspend. Mr. Miller, we recognize you have been very busy today, and we appreciate you being here. And we know that you have other things, and yet we knew that you did suggest to us that you would get here as quickly as possible. By unanimous consent, we agreed to move forward, and so the gentleman, Mr. Klein, gave his opening statement and actually has begun the questioning from the committee. By agreement up front, we agreed that when you walked in, we would suspend where we were with the recognition that Mr. Bishop was engaged in questions, but we wanted to make sure that we gave you time. So at the time that you were prepared to give any opening statement, we would wish that you would do that, and if the gentleman's ready now without objection, anything he has brought in writing will be entered into the record. Otherwise, I'll either wait or defer to the gentleman at this. The gentleman, if I could have the gentleman push that little button right there in front of you on that microphone. And we're delighted. We want to thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the courtesy of the members of the committee. We are having an election in our Steering and Policy Committee, and we just finished that. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on H.R. 5.
I strongly oppose this legislation. I believe that this legislation is letting our students down. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act affirms that every child has a right to an equal opportunity at a quality education. H.R. 5, the Republican proposal to authorize this act, effectively dismantles the civil rights promises of this law. Historically, we have always recognized that providing all children with a quality education is a critical national priority, and we have always found ways to come together on a bipartisan fashion to address this issue. Unfortunately, H.R. 5 is not bipartisan. It does not reflect a consensus, and it does not move our education system forward. This bill is very different from past efforts. A decade ago, John Boehner and I worked with Senator Ted Kennedy, President George W. Bush, in crafting No Child Left Behind more than a decade ago. We understood and agreed that there was a soft bigotry of low expectations in our education system. We agreed that hiding low achievement by some students behind averages was wrong. No Child Left Behind turned the lights on inside of our nation's schools, and for the first time, parents and communities could see whether their schools were actually teaching all students. And in that decade since this law has been in effect, the evidence is irrefutable that all kids can learn if given the opportunity to succeed regardless of their background, regardless of where they live, if they are just given a chance. However, as someone who has listened to the experts in the communities across this nation and its pros and cons, I recognize that we need to modernize the law with some fundamental changes to move us into the 21st century. That is what Congress should be tasked to do now. Instead, I believe that H.R. 5 moves us backwards. It sends our education system in the wrong direction. H.R. 5 lets our students down by not guaranteeing that all students have access to world-class, well-rounded educational opportunities needed to compete in a global economy. It lets our students down by locking sequestration cuts into the education funding, and it lets our students down with disabilities by allowing schools to lower the standards for educating these children. It lets our students down by not building on the broad consensus that we should continue to demand high standards of all students. And these shortcomings are widely recognized. An extraordinary cross-section of business, labor, civil rights, disability, and education groups oppose this legislation. For example, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is disappointed that this bill does not demand targeted support and real improvements for students stuck in low-performing schools or for the students whose schools are not teaching them in the basics of reading and math. Other organizations have echoed these concerns. The only consensus on this bill has created is a consensus of growing opposition. I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will agree that this is not a recipe for a policy success. In closing, I ask the Rules Committee to provide an open rule for consideration of this bill. Among the amendments submitted is a Democratic substitute amendment which draws from the broad consensus on the education community on what reforms are needed and builds on the lessons learned from No Child Left Behind. That is the Miller Amendment. Members should be afforded an opportunity to vote on the alternative, among other amendments like Mr. Polis's amendment on protecting students from discrimination. And I thank you for your consideration, and I thank you for the consideration of the amendments that have been submitted to the committee.
Mr. Miller, thank you very much for your testimony. I'd like to advise the members of the committee that it would be my intent at the time that Mr. Bishop has finished his questioning that I would go back and allow the gentleman from Massachusetts, myself, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina a chance to reengage Mr. Miller if we chose. If we deferred and did not choose to do that, then we would be back in order and we would continue and question both of you. If there is any objection to that, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll move forward. The gentleman from Utah is recognized. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know why you're still trying to be fair, but I appreciate that. Can I ask Mr. Klein, this is really to you, it's your bill. Other definitional questions. There are words in here. I've only spent 4 decades in education, so I don't know what the hell they mean. So you've written in here evidence-based mentorship programs. In real terms to a normal person, what does that mean? Evidence-based mentorship program. And you might as well, is that different than later on when you talk about teacher residency programs and school leader residency programs? What's a residency program?
They're not the same.
All right, so what is an evidence-based mentorship program?
I suppose the literal meaning of the words would be there's evidence in the literature that supports that approach in mentoring for teachers. Teachers have got to learn to be better.
Since the rest of the section doesn't really flesh any of that out, it just says they're going to have it. There are some programs that I know some other districts have used in which they use in-house people for mentorship. Is that what was being considered? Ongoing actual teachers for mentorship programs? There's a great one that the AFL did, or whatever it is, the AFL Teacher Union did in Toledo, in which they had teachers who would come out for a while and then go back to the classroom afterwards. Is that what you're trying to do?
You can use in-house or out,
I
if
see.
you will, for that, either one.
Then what is then a teacher residency program?
What page is that on? This is fine. Teacher residency, do you know where that is, Mr. Bishop? If not, we'll get there momentarily.
It's back in 2222.
We're catching up here just a moment.
Yeah. 222A, large A, number 5.
This is under. Yeah, may include, doesn't have to. Okay, but residency being where? But this is an instruction program, not a mentoring program. They're not quite the same. And again, it can be local or in another location, either one. Let's just pull up.
Look, I'm apologizing. You might as well just pull a chair up and stay there for a minute. I simply don't understand what the words mean, so I apologize for this. You use the phrase job-embedded programs. Job-embedded continuous professional development. Job-embedded, what does that mean in lay terms?
Yeah, I think the words exactly describe the situation that you have. It's like it's part of the job. It's like on-the-job training, if you will. It's part of the job, as opposed to going to a separate course.
All right, I'll take that one. You talk about in teacher recertification, teacher training again, how you want to have a program that will encourage and emphasize multiple career paths for teachers. I hate to say this, I don't know what heck of a lot of paths we had. What do you envision to be as a multiple career path for an educator?
More than one career path leading you up to administrative change.
So are you talking about becoming an administrator through this program?
Could be.
You are.
That would be a path that would take you off on that trail. Another is to become an instructor of other teachers, for example. Be a mentor.
You got a better path for me? Those aren't really exciting for me. All right. And another one in here, you also talk about, under the section of innovative teacher and leader activities, reforming teacher and school leader certification, recertification, licensing, and tenure systems to ensure that such systems are rigorous. Now, are we really saying that this time now that someone will determine if the teacher training program is rigorous? I mean, there is no definition for rigorous. What do you mean by rigorous? Or is that going to mean that somebody will eventually determine whether a program in a college is rigorous? And is that person going to be an employee of the, you're shaking your head, is that going to be an employee of the Department of Education who will now determine if something is rigorous or not?
There's what the law is getting at, I would think the language states, and again, there is, we're trying not to be overly prescriptive to the gentleman's earlier comments about allowing states and localities much more latitude. That's the 7 horses out of the gate, I think, in the gentleman's analogy. But it is clear that in order for schools to succeed, the most important thing is a really good teacher, and then right behind it is a principal, certainly parental involvement, but in the school itself, and there's, in some cases, there's been no effort to provide for that. This section says you need to provide for that.
And I'm sorry, that's my problem that I'm having. This is one of the three that we've lost in here, because somebody who is a bureaucrat is now going to have to determine if something is rigorous. When Senator Frist tried to put a program in here that's saying we're going to have a new Pell Grants program for kids who have had a rigorous curriculum, we objected to that, and it took us 2 years, but we finally took it out simply because that meant the Federal Department of Education was now going to be able to be the ones who would determine what rigorous is, not the local governments. If we're putting the word rigorous in here, what you're now doing is allowing somebody in the Federal Department of Education to determine if that college program is indeed rigorous. That's one of the things that I have a significant problem with that. You have another one in here that says when you're dealing with development of teacher funds, that you can use these funds for student achievement data derived from a variety of sources as a significant factor in determining a teacher's evaluation. It's a problem I have here because that is not a defined term. What is the significant factor? What is the percentage? How important is it? And who in the hell gets to decide what is significant or not? That's part of the problem I have with the teacher recertification concept that you have here. But it does say that in here you're going to use a variety of sources, and it has to be a significant factor in determining a teacher's evaluation. What is significant?
That will be determined locally as well. What we're trying to say is you've got...
That's the problem. This is not going to be determined locally. This allows a Federal agency to determine what is a significant factor.
No.
Why doesn't it?
Because this is directing the locals to do that. It doesn't say you have to have secretarial approval.
So the Secretary will not, there will never be a time when we get a bureaucrat in the Department of Education or a Secretary who will come to a State and say, we're going to withhold your money because this is not a rigorous or this is not a significant factor in your teacher evaluation program. And you don't have to answer. That's almost rhetorical because unfortunately in my State, that's what exactly happened under No Child Left Behind, and it was under a Republican administration, for heaven's sakes, who threatened our State not only with withholding of education funds, but highway funds and all other Federal funds if we didn't acquiesce to the N factor that they wanted us to do, the test they wanted us to do, as well as the percentage that they wanted us to come up with. So there is a history of problems we've had in the past, and there's a history of problems that I have a fear for in the future, and it's one of the reasons why I'm going through all this crap, and I apologize for you doing that. Let me cut this short because there are a couple of other things that I simply don't understand the rules, the questions, and the wording in here is frightening to me. However, having said that, I also think some of those words can be worked out as the bill progresses through. The one thing that can't be worked out is the concept of teacher performance, teacher evaluation, which is an insistence upon it being based on objective data. And even though those are such as, you just said, are optional, you're still trying to do it on some kind of objective data. When Potter Stewart was still on the Supreme Court, he had a pornography case that came to him, and he made the classic statement that I can't define it, but I know pornography when I see it. I'm sorry. I can't define a good teacher, but I know it when I see it. Because unfortunately, there is no objective data that actually equates to what the teacher can and cannot do. Any kind of objective data runs the form of something else. Evaluating teachers are simply subjective. I have had teacher evaluations all my career. They've all been positive. It's not that I hate them or got screwed over by them. But I do remember one year where my vice principal looked at me and said, look, you're a teacher, you're a kid-centered teacher, wish we had more of you at the school. Your value to the school will not be reflected in my evaluation, because the stuff of the evaluation had to include things like bulletin boards. I had none. Attendance at faculty meetings, which I hated with a passion, and attended them even less than I do conference now. All these kinds of, and the next year they used a different form as well. As a teacher, I knew how to manipulate the system, so I went in and I did the schedules for my own kids and for anyone else that would ask me to help them out. And I always put my kids with the teachers I wanted them. I put them in the best teachers we had by my evaluation. Every one of the teachers I rejected for my own kid was a teacher who had won some award from somebody and would have a student that would swear that that teacher saved his or her life, and probably did. But the difference is that that's not the way it works. And the most common expression for all teachers is still, "This too shall pass." I don't care whether it comes from the state or from the national level. We realize if we're just patient, we can outlive this one, and something else will take its place. By definition, this is a subjective process. That does not mean that I don't think it's possible of actually evaluating teachers. And here I'm going to be even more conservative than the rest of you or Dr. Fox at the same time. If parents are satisfied with the teacher, if they have a full load of students who want to be in that class, by definition, that is a good teacher. And I don't care what kind of objective data you have, it's not going to change that definition. We can evaluate teachers if we're willing to, one, admit that it's going to be subjective and it's simply your mindset. And number two, if market forces can be used to evaluate it. Parental satisfaction is the only way of dealing with that. And anyone who tells me that they'll choose an easy teacher, that by definition, that person is stupid. Parents care about their kids. Kids know what is going on. A kid will choose an easy teacher over a bad, hard one, but they'll also choose a hard, good teacher over an easy teacher anytime. The only problem is you've got to come up with a system that will allow those market forces to go into effect and will allow every parent the same right I had with my own kids in being able to determine who the teacher is. And that's why the 6 standards you have, such as, and then come up with those, I reject those totally. Those are useless. They should not be in there. And more importantly, it is not our responsibility. We're not a school board. And I don't care how righteous the cause is, if it's not our responsibility, it is wrong for us to do it. It is wrong for us to be involved in this kind of decision-making. And if a local district wants to use a way of staffing that we find to be wrong, tough. That should be their prerogative. That's what federalism was all about. So I apologize going through this. I do have some other questions of verbiage that was there. I'm not going to impose on you any longer with that. I think I've said here there are some words in there that clearly I don't understand. No teacher does understand what they mean, and I think they could be clarified much more specifically and significantly. But once again, as the bill goes forward, that could be handled. But I do have some philosophical problems that deal with portability. The idea of a local district circumventing the state is something that I find repulsive, to be honest with you. And the idea of teacher evaluation being mandated by the federal government is something that I just see out of the bounds of the scope of our responsibility. However good intentioned it may be, it is still wrong. It's still wrong. I'll yield back.
Maybe you want to change priorities?
I won't yield back quite yet. I appreciate it, because I appreciated the comments of Mr. McGovern. You almost convinced me to vote for his bill straight out, so thank you for that.
The comments are all in order, and I do appreciate and respect not only the gentleman, Mr. Klein, being here, but would also remind us we're probably all subject to this, Mr. Miller, so get ready. I want to thank the gentleman, Mr. Bishop. One thing I learned years ago, serving with him, it is always a good thing to have a person who reads the bill before they vote on it and will question it and take the time to do the homework. And I applaud the gentleman from Utah for doing that. As we agreed earlier, now, Mr. Miller, we're going to begin the part of the questioning again that we did up front, and I referred to this as murderer's row over here, that being myself, Mrs. Fox, and Mr. Bishop. I now recognize the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Mrs. Fox. If the gentlewoman previously did not have an opportunity to, gentlewoman made it for, she did not have an opportunity to question the gentleman, Mr. Miller. And I'm sorry, I should have been more specific in that. I whispered that when you came in, but I also said I love you too, so you probably focused on that part of my discussion. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Oh, every once in a while, I'm pretty slow on the uptake. I understand what you're saying.
You got the
I got the
idea.
point. I do. I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're extremely kind to me. I don't have any questions for Mr. Miller. Thank you.
You know, what's interesting is that she's backed off all the promises that she came into this with, that she couldn't wait to see you guys. But things are going well. Gentleman from Massachusetts now recognized. Gentleman has no questions. Gentleman, Mr. Bishop is recognized if he wishes to consume more time. Gentleman, when choose. Gentlewoman yields back his time. Gentleman, Judge
Chairman,
Hastings.
I just ask unanimous consent that the statement of the administration be put into the record and highlight the fact that the administration has indicated that if this measure were to pass, it would be vetoed by the administration.
Gentleman, without objection, the statement will be entered into the record. Gentleman yields
And I
back.
thank the gentleman for their testimony. I have no questions.
I thank the gentleman very much. Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Florida is recognized. This is this would be questions for both now. Thank you very much. Gentleman's recognized.
I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that you qualified it and cleared it up for me. I will tell you just a response from a number of teachers that we gave at least the updated or the highlights of AYP for one, the elimination of there was some dancing in the streets, I will tell you. From the highly qualified teacher initiative that is eliminated, once again, dancing in the streets by a number of teachers, because really they agree with Mr. Bishop of that, you know, the states, while they may not always get it right, the states and the local school board have a much clearer picture of the educational needs of students than this body sitting here. And having been married to an educator for 38 years, I kind of value her experience because she is one of those teachers that you know the worth is when all the principals, every time when I was sheriff, we'd be in an event and they're trying to get my wife to move to their school because of her ability as it related to reading. So I applaud what you're doing here, and hearing from teachers back home, in particular those that I know, they're pretty happy with the direction of this bill. Obviously, I think the only area that they're, from a public school teacher standpoint, they're not overly thrilled about is the charter school initiative, but that's to be expected from public school teachers. But overall, they truly do appreciate where this is moving, and I'm one that agrees with Mrs. Fox that the Federal Government should have less to do with public education than it does, and this is a move in the right direction. So I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before getting to the substance of the bill itself, I want to ask Chairman Klein if I noticed that the bill is 515 pages. And I wanted to say, just because it's 515 pages long, does that necessarily make it a bad bill?
May I ask, as compared to what, 2,700 pages or 1,100 pages or what?
And the point I'm making is that I hope that members of this committee, and I want to make it clear that wasn't a jab directed at you or the length of the bill. It's directed at my colleagues who frequently criticize lengths of bills. And this particular bill is 515 pages. I don't happen to support it, but I don't oppose it because it's 515 pages. And I look forward to talking about some of the merits of this bill, as well as some of the areas that it falls short. But I hope that in this committee and the Congress at large, we focus on the content of bills rather than their length. This committee and this House have voted on a number of one-page bills, which have been awful. We have also had longer bills that have been good or bad, and this particular bill is 515 pages, and I know despite its length, it still has the full support of the committee Republicans and the chairman, and its length should not be held for it or against it. Education is a complex topic. And in addition to the federal role, there is a state role, a local role. I certainly enjoyed the exchange between the gentleman from Utah and the gentleman from Minnesota. I sympathize with the gentleman from Minnesota deeply in his answers and his interrogation by the gentleman from Utah. Some of us view this differently. I view elected officials at all levels, federal, state, and local, as having a responsibility of making sure that every child in this country has access to a good education. And you know, this adult turf fighting, I mean, oh, you say it's federal, you say it's state. In my state, they say, oh, it's local, it's district, it's not state, it's not district, it's federal, it's not local, it's charter school, it's not district. You know what? These are adults talking about stuff. I mean, they're debating stuff, it's words. But what matters is the teacher in the classroom, is the kid getting the good education? And no matter how we can help make sure that happens for more kids in our country, I'm all for it. I'm for reform at the district level. I'm for reform at the state level. I'm for reform at the federal level. And to its credit, this bill keeps some of the provisions in place in terms of making sure that there's transparency around whether kids are making progress. The problem with this bill is it's a step forward about the crucial role of ensuring that standards mean something and that there's consequences if standards aren't reached. I think it's an abrogation of our own responsibilities, elected officials, to say, you know what, if a state wants to make itself look good, if a district wants to design testing with the state to make it look like they have no achievement gaps, there's no federal oversight of that, despite the fact that we're funding about 10% of education. And there's a natural tendency of elected officials, including at this level, but in this particular point directed at the state and local level, to make themselves look good, to make it look like we reformed education, now we're going to measure it. Guess what? Our reforms worked because we also designed the way that we measure those reforms. And that's a natural human tendency. And that's why the federal government has a particularly important role as an honest broker, to say, you know what, there needs to be an objective and fair evaluation. There needs to make sure that it's a way that standards mean something, that it means kids are college ready. There's a bogeyman that's raised of this somehow federal government is involved with core common standards. And the truth is, as you know, these are not federal standards. And when colleagues of mine from either side of the aisle, but particularly the other side, rail against core common standards here in this body, I simply tell them you ran for the wrong office. You should have run for state board, commissioner, state legislature if your state adopted core common standards and you don't like them. And if you're here, you know, what are you doing here railing against core common standards? You're simply not federal.
Would the gentleman yield for...
I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman from Florida.
Just on the core common standards, not taking whether they're good or bad, I think the objection that I have is when the federal government says, if you don't do this, you don't get money.
Reclaiming my time, and to be clear, the federal government has not said that. And in fact, many states have adopted core common standards. There's been a couple other states that have adopted other standards. What the federal government is saying to my colleague from Florida is adopt college-ready standards that mean something. So we have high expectations for kids. You know what? If you want to go through a process in your state and do it on your own and have, you know, career and college-ready standards, that's terrific. If you want to, because of economies of scale or because of the convenience of people that move between states, work with other states to do it, that's fine. And there have been several other states. And Secretary Duncan highlighted those in his testimony to our committee that have adopted alternative career and college-ready standards. The issue is that no state should be able to mislead the public by defining adequacy down and adopting weak, non-college-ready, non-career-ready standards, and then somehow claiming success because your kids are able to achieve them. That would be a race to the bottom instead of a proverbial race to the top. So it's not a question at its root of federal control. It's a question at its root of the federal government being a fair referee to ensure that there's transparency that's meaningful at the state and local level. And that districts and states can't hide behind defining adequacy down to continue to perpetuate the failure of their own public schools. I think we've had a lot of experience since the passage of No Child Left Behind. And I also want to compliment the Chair on including many of the provisions that I work closely with him and Ranking Member Miller on with regard to charter schools. Before I came to Congress, I had the opportunity to start 2 charter schools and run one as superintendent, and I think we really upped the bar in achievement and expansion and replication of high-quality charter schools, as well as making sure that there's the right interventions in place for charter schools that need to improve. I want to address just a couple of questions to our witnesses after my initial comments as well. I want to start and express my gratitude to Mr. Miller for highlighting the need for the Student Non-Discrimination Act, which we included in our committee substitute, and we have offered as a standalone amendment here today. 9 in 10 lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender children report being bullied in school. And it interferes with learning in districts across our country. And I'd like to ask our ranking member, in his experience over the years, how important a safe learning environment is for all kids to learn, and particularly issues affecting our LGBT youth.
I thank him for not only his amendment, but also for his advocacy on behalf of this issue in terms of school safety, and certainly within the LGBT community and just students generally. We know that a very good number of students encounter bullying, violence at school, ridicule, and we can shake that all off until you can't shake it all off. And we just think that you know, schools have got to be aware of this. We'd like them to take actions to institute policies where students can go to discuss this. A number of schools have very creative provisions in terms of sort of peer work, where students hold other students accountable. They get to make their complaints in front of other students, and they sort of work it out at that peer level. Obviously, some of it takes on a much more serious form, and we know that students, the schools rather, have to be prepared and understand that in many instances they may have to report those more serious forms of violence. All across this nation, we see that, in fact, serious incidents of abuse on campus, tragically in some instances by school personnel, but very often student on student, that is hidden from the community, hidden from the parents. And students then realize they may have nowhere to turn. And so it's a complicated issue. But more and more research tells us it's affecting more and more children in the school. I like to think when I went to school back in the 50s and the 60s, this was just roughhousing, and this was the rites of passage, and that's the way it was. I don't know that I was right then, and I'm certainly not right today if I had that policy, because it's a much different environment for many of these young people, and I would hope that that amendment would be made in order so that Congress could express itself on that.
I thank the gentleman, and as the ranking member knows, we introduced the Student Non-Discrimination Act along with our Rules Committee colleague, Congresswoman Ross-Layton, and has over 155 sponsors. And I'd just like to ask the Chair that, again, regardless of what people feel about the way people live their lives, and I know there's many disagreement about whether people can get married or not and so forth, but shouldn't schools be a safe learning environment for all kids, regardless of what decisions they make and whether you or I agree with how they live their lives?
I can't imagine anybody would disagree that a school shouldn't be a safe learning environment. If I could just pick up on your conversation, and it's related, I'm not going to leave the subject, about charter schools. Mm-hmm. and bullying, the two of them. I was telling Mr. Miller in a conversation we were having probably during a hearing, shouldn't maybe admit that, but a visit that I had to Harlem a few weeks ago, and visiting with Jeffrey Canada, who's got the Promise Academies in the Harlem Children's Zone. And just by the way, unbelievable transformation, not just for those kids there, but for Harlem itself. Incredible work. And we talked about bullying. Mm-hmm. And I asked him, I said, well, is bullying an issue here? You got to remember, these schools they're in the projects there. It's a pretty tough country. He said, we don't have any bullying. And I said, well, how do you account for that? And it starts with right from the top, right all the way through. He's able to hold his staff, his teachers, totally accountable in a way that's not always available in some of the public schools. So it's permeated throughout his system. And if he has a teacher a staff, a counselor who is not supportive, he can remove them. So there are ways out there. I'm not hereby endorsing the Federal law, but I certainly support the gentleman's assertion that every student should be going to school in a safe environment.
And I would agree.
We ought to look for ways to find that.
And I would agree with the Chairman that school choice in charter schools can help. In fact, there are specifically schools that cater to the needs of LGBT youth and LGBT families, charter schools in Chicago and New York that have been started for that specific purpose. As the Chair knows, there are also many areas in the district, rural areas, et cetera, where school choice it can't, from a nature of critical mass, exist. If you come from a small town with 1,000 families, you have a school, you go there, and it's tough. It might be tough to grow up if you are the only African-American family in town. It might be tough to grow up if you're the only gay kid in town. It might be tough to grow up if you're the only Catholic in town or the only Muslim or the only Jew in town. And our public schools, in those cases, also need to make sure that school is safe for every kid to learn. But I certainly agree that charter schools and choice can help provide safe learning environments, and do in Harlem and in other places across the country where they exist. I want to talk to the Chairman about a similar topic to the exchange with Mr. Bishop, and that's teacher preparation. I do agree with where we're ultimately trying to go in some ways in terms of looking at school districts adopting teacher evaluations. I'm a co-sponsor of the Stellar Act here, looking at making sure that student progress is part of that evaluation. Obviously, these are determined at the district level, but we want to make sure that districts are having these discussions. My question is with regard to this 3-year window that we have, where we seem to throw out highly qualified and have nothing in place to make sure that teachers, including teachers who are funded with Federal dollars, are high quality. And can't we do better or have a more constructive approach? And I have an amendment to at least require reporting during that period. But what is the thought about how there's just this 3-year hiatus from any process of making sure that there's qualified teachers before the program goes in for evaluation that districts will run?
I thank the gentleman. We recognize, of course, that it takes some time to put these evaluation processes in place. But we also believe that the highly qualified teacher metric, again, well-intentioned, really is not helpful at all in determining whether or not a teacher is good. How many degrees they have and certifications they have is not the issue. And the gentleman may remember, although No Child Left Behind was passed before he and I were here, but not before Mr. Miller, that the very first waivers that were requested in No Child Left Behind had to do with the highly qualified teacher requirement. And because rural schools, to the gentleman's analogy of a small town with one school, just simply couldn't comply. And so it's more a recognition that that's not very helpful, as well as allowing the states to develop some their own teacher evaluation systems. We're just suggesting that that's a better than the status quo, which is a last hired, first fired, and there's no way, nothing in place to evaluate teachers. We want to give latitude to how to do that, and I listened carefully to Mr. Bishop, who spent a lot of years teaching, his comments, but the status quo, which is recognized across the country, which has led to the movies like Waiting for Superman, where you have rooms full of teachers who simply should not be in the classroom, or they're being paid and waiting for their hearing. We're just trying to move away from that.
And that's where we hope to go after the 3-year period. And my home state has adopted teacher evaluation standards that meet these requirements. The question is about moving to nothing during this 3-year period. I would argue, and I've argued in committee, that I'm no fan of the definition of highly qualified teacher, and we can do better, and we need to replace it. But it's better than having no standard, and so would the additional transparency measures that my amendment provides. I will be withdrawing my amendment, but I look forward to continuing to work on this intermediary period that we need on this issue. I want to ask the ranking member on this teacher preparedness issue as well.
On that issue, I want to say that when we wrote No Child Left Behind, the idea of a highly qualified teacher, as you know, is a very simple one, that you would have subject matter competency and you'd have a degree, from school. That did dramatically change the makeup of the teacher corps coming to schools in the last several years, but it was not the last word. It was the beginning. Why subject matter competency? Because if you were in a poor school, if you're in a minority school, you had about a 1 in 7 chance of having a mathematics teacher or an arithmetic teacher who had any subject matter competency at all that was teaching that class. They could have every other competency because they just shifted them in there. We said at some point, the person who's teaching ought to know the subject matter. And that's sort of like jacks are better to get in the game. It didn't give you a winning hand, but it gave you some criteria. In my own state, at the time that we did No Child Left Behind, we had 60,000 teachers on provisionary tickets who had agreed that they would get their state certification within a year, and 6 and 7 and 8 years later, they were still in the schools. And what schools were they in? They were in the poorest schools in the state. They were, in fact, hiding out in poor schools because people weren't going to ask what is happening in this school because nobody much gave a damn. Maybe the parents in the neighborhood did, but they didn't have the political voice. And when highly qualified teacher changed, it changed the makeup of those communities and the makeup of those schools. And we're still struggling to get qualified math and science teachers into K through 12 schools. So that wasn't the end of all, and that's why we've now moved to another arrangement in terms of trying to develop qualified and effective teachers.
And I do agree, and that the definition of highly qualified teacher was a step forward, clearly, and which is why during this intermediary period, and I think there's also agreement that an intermediary period is necessary. It does take a while for districts to come up with evaluation, but there should be something more than nothing. Whether you stick with highly qualified or whether you have additional transparency, as we have in our proposed Democratic substitute, something needs to exist during that 3-year period because we don't want to take a step back to where we were. The final issue I want to address with the Chair and Ranking Members with regards to students with disabilities. And No Child Left Behind was an enormous step forward in many ways for families of students with disabilities. It ensured that finally schools were accountable to meet the learning needs of every child. And unfortunately, in this bill, the 1% cap on the use of assessment scores for accountability purposes for students with disabilities is removed. And effectively, districts are able to, at largely their discretion, as far as I can tell, without any cap, to determine how many kids should be exempt effectively from accountability and the inclusion of their assessment scores. And again, looking at the incentives of the adults in any system, school boards, states, one way under this proposed regime to increase, looks like their scores are increasing, is simply to exclude more kids. Kids, by the way, that happen to receive more federal funding, kids that have IEPs and kids that we invest in with our special ed money. We've never met our full 40% commitment. I have a bill that fully funds that without raising taxes and reduces the deficit. But people on both sides of the aisle have complained about having, nevertheless, one of the major areas that we invest in particular, our kids with special learning needs to ensure that our public schools are able to cater to the needs of all kids. So my question is, doesn't it in fact reduce the transparency and incentive for districts to serve all kids and go against the very spirit of special education and Title V if we remove that cap and allow these gaps to be hidden by school districts, and I'll address that to the Chair.
Yeah, I thank the gentleman for his question, and this is a subject that has been a matter of much discussion, as I'm sure the gentleman can understand. The disability community, if I can use that term, is very split on this issue. We believe that we are still requiring testing in this law at grade level. You're right, the gentleman is correct. Under current law, there's a cap, 1% cap. That's somewhat of an arbitrary number. And again, in the tone of this bill, we are deferring to the judgment of the local school, the local superintendent, the local principal, the local school board to make the determination. This bill removes AYP. And so one of the reasons for an incentive, if you will, to misbehave was so your AYP was not affected and you would be, your grade level score would not be affected. This removes AYP, and so I think that some of the gentleman's concerns about what might happen if you lift that cap should not be a concern because of that removal. So I think, again, the community is very divided on this. We believe that we've struck the balance by saying you need a test, but we've removed the cap because sometimes maybe it's 1.5% of the whole student body or 2% and not 1%.
I'd like to go to the ranking member as well on this issue.
The fact is that under the provisions in the majority's bill in H.R. 5, students with disabilities almost disappear from any kind of accountability at all, and that's the fear of the disability community. Disability community largely be made up of parents, that their children are going to get short shrift at a chance at academic accomplishments. And what we have seen is, over the last decade is that, in fact, many of these children are able to participate to a great extent and, in fact, achieve and thrive in the regular program with some difficulty, no question about that. And now, in the last 3 to 5 years, or I'd say last 3 years, the advent of technology is now allowing many more of these children to participate in the regular program. In Mr. McGovern's state, among the most rapid improving class of individuals, not just because they started at the bottom, but they've continued the improvement throughout the many years, is students with disability in Massachusetts, which has one of the tougher standards in the country. There was a discussion here about college career ready or Common Core. Massachusetts left this flock a long time ago and is maybe the only state that you can actually compare with high-performing countries in other parts of the world in terms of their assessments and their standards for learning, and students with disabilities are doing well in that. And I would just say the disabilities community is not split on this. The parents are not split on this. They are opposed to this legislation because they are afraid that once again, under this very loose language, their children will disappear. And we know throughout this entire time the propensity is to game those statistics all of the time. To try to make the school's performance look better to the community. I mean, we saw 17 governors that after No Child Left Behind, they dumbed down their exams, and then they dumbed them down again. This is a country where we say we have to have a worldwide, globalized, talented workforce, and for political reasons, we keep a number of states dumb down that and suggest that somehow that is success. So this is a constant effort. I probably have spent more time with educators on issues of disability where what they're really asking for is relief from educating these kids. And under the substitute that we're offering, they in fact can design, the State can design a set of assessments for the more profoundly disabled students and try and make those conscious judgments publicly, not simply deciding that you're going to push this young person off to the side. Thank you.
And in addition to that moral argument, which the ranking member eloquently made, isn't our investment in serving students with disabilities one of the main areas that we invest our Federal resources in, and therefore are accountable for at our level to make sure that that investment works?
That's the goal. This legislation, we're putting about $17 billion in Title I, Title II. I don't have the figure off the top of my head for IDEA, but this is a substantial amount of money. And the question that we have, and I think that parents have, and certainly taxpayers have, are we getting our money's worth? Is this working? And if there's no accountability and there's not a lot of transparency, we're back to pre No Child Left Behind days, where they only talked about that the average in the school was better, and all they were doing was whipping the top 25% of the students a little harder, and they'd get their average up, or every 3 years they'd change the exam, or every 3 years they'd change the superintendent of schools, or every 3 years the governor would change the exam because the governor didn't want to be compared to the progress that had been made, and you could start over again. So we've been through all of that. And the time really is to move on with the system that is transparent and accountable. Thank you.
Well, thank the gentleman, and to make the point clear with my colleagues, in addition to the moral imperative to serve all children, over $15 billion in IDEA expenditures, and we owe it to the taxpayers to show that that money is having an impact in serving all kids. And to give districts that money without, and effectively, removing accountability by allowing them not to include the children that they're investing that Federal money in their accountability or their testing, would be an enormous disservice to the taxpayers we serve. Again, well above and beyond the moral dimension of not being accountable for meeting the learning needs of all kids. I'd like to close by voicing my appreciation for Mr. Miller's Democratic substitute, which helps expand learning time, STEM education. It also invests in our nation's teachers by increasing teacher accountability for student achievement, but also supporting our educators through high-quality professional development in that process. I also compliment the substitute for including good language on charter schools as well, and appreciate working with Mr. Miller and his staff, as well as Mr. Klein and his staff, in making sure that where we have high-quality learning environments through charter schools, it's an issue that can transcend the partisan morass that ties us down and divides us on so many issues. And we ultimately, on both sides of the aisle, care about results and kids, and that's what we're here for. And I hope that we can be less bogged down by the fights between the adults, and whether those are fights between Federal, state, and local, or whether they're fights between teachers and districts, or whether they're fights between charters and district schools. At the end of the day, for us as elected officials, I hope that we all act in the best interests of our country and of the kids who benefit and are so critical for the continued prosperity of our democratic republic. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Miller, thinking about my colleague from Colorado's point about 508 pages. I know you've offered a substitute, but did the chairman get anything right in 508 pages? Did the chairman get anything right in this bill? I mean, you all have been working on this for a long time. It's pretty thorough front to back. What went right here?
Because I'm deeply concerned about the basic flaws in the legislation, as we've had in this last discussion. Its impacts on accountability, its impacts on whether or not we're going to have students who graduate from high school and can make a choice and be able to exercise that choice on whether or not they want to start a career, go to work, or go to college. This is what the employer community has told us, and I don't see that in this legislation. The discussion we just had on students with disabilities and their parents and the educational opportunities that they may or may not have. What happens to poor communities? What happens to Title I schools when more and more of this becomes a block grant? And I represent a couple of big mixed districts, and I know how the money migrates away from the poor schools into the wealthier schools for all kinds of extra add-ons, but the poor kids are still struggling with basic academics. So those are big flaws in the chairman's bill, and that would be my concern.
Undoubtedly, there are things that we disagree about. But to my colleague's point about big bills, I don't like big bills. I think small bills are better.
Big, small, doesn't matter. Some pretty lethal bills with very few words.
And the reason I like small bills better is because I can understand what it is that someone's against. Right? If the bill says change or to and, I can understand that you don't like that conjunction. But I understand what you don't like in this bill. You've laid those things out well. But I confess, I'm biased. I'm a big fan of Chairman Klein's, big fan. And I'm glad this bill's in front of us today. I'm just wondering if we'd done it differently, if it had come in smaller sections on different topics, a Title I section, a disabilities section, a charter section. Was there any hope at all within these pages for having the majority and the minority come together on behalf of students in the country, or is that just
well, historically that's been the case, but that has not been the case in the last two iterations of trying to do this. Chairman McKeon and I worked together and put out a bipartisan print. We both got shot to death by the critics on both sides of that effort, but that was a high-risk effort, but it was a bipartisan effort. As you know, Speaker Boehner and I wrote the House versions of No Child Left Behind, and it's been bipartisan since 1964. It's just not bipartisan now.
Chairman, I represent Broad Prize winning Gwinnett County. Can I brag about that? Broad Prize winning. For my colleagues who don't know, the Broad Prize goes out to the best urban education school district in the nation. I only have 2 counties in my district. One of my counties, finest urban education school district in the nation. My teachers and administrators there are thrilled with this. I have gotten several calls to say, please, Rob, don't accept amendments to change this. We don't like the way some of those amendments are going. But I don't know if the chants are going on outside your office door as they are mine. Just thrilled about that flexibility. But I have to ask you, because I'm a local control guy. We get about 8.5 cents in Gwinnett County out of every dollar from the feds. Are there any jurisdictions that don't get any cents at all? Is everybody getting? Mr. Polis mentioned 10 cents out of a dollar. Is everybody getting something? Is there something for everybody in this bill, or are there some districts that are affluent enough, they're doing things well enough that we're not sending any federal dollars to those districts because they're succeeding okay? We're concentrating our federal dollars in districts that need help.
I can't imagine what that district would be that's not getting some federal money, but clearly schools that have more poor kids, more Title I dollars, are going to get more money than affluent from more federal money. So it's not even. We were talking about the Title I money following the student. That would make a change again. And it's so often the case, Mr. Woodall, there are winners and losers in where the money goes by formula. And if you tweak it a little bit one way or the other, somebody, maybe Georgia, somebody in Georgia is going to be real happy, and somebody in California is not going to be happy, and back and forth. This piece of legislation tries to walk that line and not create whole new categories of winners and losers. And if I could, I know that Mr. Miller doesn't like the legislation. I understand that, even though we spent hours together trying to find a way to come together. But there is some legislation. The whole charter school section title in this was a very bipartisan bill, had a lot of bipartisan support on the floor of the House when we did last year, and it's essentially the same this year as it was last year.
Well, I have not had a bill in my 2.5 years in Congress that I've heard as much positive response from grassroots folks who I know care about issues. Right? We all talk about kids. I tell every town hall meeting that watch whoever goes to the floor of the House, because whether it's most conservative Republican or most liberal Democrat, they'll tell you what they're doing today is for the young people. Now, we may disagree on what we ought to be doing for the young people, but we all have the young people in our hearts. In my district, our county administrator likes to say we only have 2 kinds of people working for us: teachers and people who support teachers. Those are the only folks involved in the school system back home, and they are enthusiastic about the opportunities that are contained herein. I know it's not easy to bring this forward, but I just want you to know how much folks in the 7th District of Georgia appreciate it. With that, I yield back, Mr.
Joan yields back. Time. Gentleman in Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill does away with No Child Left Behind, Mr. Chairman?
This bill replaces No Child Left Behind. That's right.
Well, I know, I only know Florida, don't know anybody else, but I've heard all kinds of things here at this table from different places at different times and different things that have happened, which almost proves the fact that the federal government is expert in stamping out cookie cutters. And unfortunately, that cookie cutter has to stamp out a program for Orlando, Florida, or just the state of Florida, and Butte, Montana, and inner city New York. And for the most part, other than a few waivers here and there, it ends up being the same cookie cutter for all of them. And so I think that's why you've got support and against and whatever and all kinds of problems with it, because we're expert at dealing with cookie cutters. It's just they don't work. In Florida, in 1993, we began developing the Florida Sunshine State Standards. Democrat legislature, Democrat governor, and Democrat Commissioner of Education. Those were eventually adopted in 1996, and there was a group, myself included, along with the leader in the Senate, and the governor, who was a Democrat, our former Governor Lawton Childs, who was a colleague up here in the U.S. Senate, friend of Mr. Hastings, along with the teacher unions and the School Board Association, all came together and said, we agree that the Florida Sunshine State Standards are the standards we want to teach to, and that there would be a test, Florida Comprehensive Education, FCAT, assessment test, and that would be the basis for grading schools. That was in 1997. And so long before there was a No Child Left Behind, Florida established not only standards, but also a way, not just to test those standards, but to grade our schools. And there was probably the first time ever there had been, because of that grading, a real concerted effort to make schools better. And this was a bipartisan group of people from all spectrums, not just bipartisan in that there was a few moderates that supported it. This was from the left, the right, and the middle. Then, I won't go into any more than that. That happened, and it's worked. And there were consequences to having a school graded F. Matter of fact, if it was F 2 years in a row, those students could leave and go to any other school in the district that they wanted to go to. And the school and the state would provide the transportation. All I can tell you is, when No Child Left Behind came along, there's a lot of talk here about how it raised the standards in some states, and that may have happened, but it was a burden to Florida because it was worse. It was not as good as the program we had. It lowered our standards, which is sad. There was no reason for the state of Florida to be under No Child Left Behind, none. Because all the things that are talked about here that happened, we'd already done. 95% of the money that goes to a student in the state of Florida stays in that school, wherever that student lands. So if they have other monies attached to them or some sort of categorical, whatever it is, it stays there. Why? Because we don't have, there was at one point in time the winners and losers, in that there were schools in the district that seemed to get all the money, and then there were the losers maybe in the poor areas that didn't, and that doesn't take place there. So I could go step by all of the things that have said here that this law did improve, I can say hampered us. So bringing us up to date, I was at a conference, AVID, which is a nationwide program. I just went and sat at a group discussing that program, which takes average learners and turns them into college students. It's an awesome program. Most of them would may not graduate. A lot of them would at least not go to college. And so there's just a broad range of teachers there. Every one of them, this is before this bill happened, every one of them here just a few months ago said, if you could do one thing, would you please repeal No Child Left Behind? It is a burden to us. All we do is shuffle paper because our standards are better, our testing is better, everything we do is better. Now, we got a waiver, and we're sort of out from under some of that, but not all of it. So all I can tell you is I'm appreciative of this bill, because if it does what I think it does, which you have said it does, then it is going to serve at least the citizens in my district in a very positive way, but not just the citizens. It's going to serve the students, and it will serve the teachers who feel like they're overburdened by becoming paper shufflers when they really just want to teach. So thank you for bringing forward this bill.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And before coming to Congress, I was an educator, a Florida certified teacher. I was the owner and the operator of a private elementary school in Hialeah, working section of South Florida. I earned a doctorate in education at the University of Miami, thanks to many of you who filled out all of my surveys. So education is in my blood, and I have seen all sides of the education system. I know how important education is to our local states, our own states and our local school districts, so that they can set their own priorities when educating our nation's children. Our children are the future of our families, of our communities, of our nation. They're the ones who in the future will decide what to do to bring jobs to our communities, to strengthen our economies, to lead us into the future. And that is part of what inspired me to come to Washington, to make sure that our children are given the tools they need to be our great nation's next wave of leaders. And the teachers that we entrust with this vital goal are just as important. In my South Florida community, we boast some of the country's finest teachers, teachers whose unwavering dedication to their students should inspire us all. Empowering teachers to reach their utmost potential is something that I value immensely. Teachers understand the essential duty that they have undertaken, and they want to innovate. They want to spend extra time and push their students to the next level. But too often, we in Congress get in the way because we prevent teachers from doing what they do best. So while we in Congress can make sure that our communities and our teachers and our students have the resources they need, the states and the local districts really know how to do it better. And this is a bill to get them to what they want to do. They're the ones that know. So let us put our faith back in teachers, back in the local school administrators, back to the families of our students. And with this bill, we have the power to shape the lives of so many individuals. And let's make sure that each and every one of them can receive the kind of local individual attention that they so rightly deserve. And Mr. Chairman, in case I missed the opportunity to speak in favor of Mr. Polis's amendment, I'd like to just take a few brief moments to do that. And I thank the gentleman from Colorado for his amendment. Through the years, we have seen a lot of bullying taking place at our schools, and LGBT students are particularly vulnerable to harassment and bullying within our education system. They currently lack the protections that would prohibit this dreadful behavior. And according to the Human Rights Campaign, it's estimated that over 85% of LGBT students report being harassed in schools. And they are known to suffer from diminished education results. It can bring about serious health issues, self-inflicted violence, and even suicide. And just this week, we had an article come out, gay New Mexico teen commits suicide after reportedly being bullied by classmates, 17-year-old Carlos Vigil. And it's just so sad, and we see it throughout the nation. It's frightening that so many kids feel let down by the very adults who are there to educate and to protect them. And a majority of harassed LGBT students don't report the incidents because they don't think that their teachers are going to do anything, or they fear that reporting it will only make their situation worse. Now, we have federal law that prohibits discrimination and harassment based on race, gender, or religion, but not on, we don't do anything to curb discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. And so the federal law is failing LGBT students, and I thank Mr. Polis for bringing up this important amendment about discrimination against these students in public schools across the country. And the Polis Amendment, as well as the Student Non-Discrimination Act legislation upon which the Polis Amendment is based on, will ensure that all students have access to a safe public education free from discrimination and harassment, and I'm proud to co-sponsor it. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Gentlewoman's comments are appreciated, and thank you very much for bringing those up, especially in response and helpful to the gentleman from Colorado. Gentlewoman yields back her time. The gentleman from Texas is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. April of last year, my school districts came in to see me, and they were concerned because they were having trouble meeting the benchmarks of adequate yearly progress. The one-year language proficiency, we have a number of people who move into our district, some by virtue of the fact that Texas is indeed a border state, some by virtue of the fact that the State Department resettles refugee populations in North Texas. But for whatever reason, the language proficiency, the one-year requirement for language proficiency was difficult to meet, and other aspects of adequate yearly progress were difficult to meet. As a consequence, some previously recognized suburban schools were going to be judged as failing schools. And the superintendent said, is there anything you can do to help us? So I called the Secretary of Education. This is April of 2012. And I said, Mr. Secretary, let me explain the situation to you. You tell me what you can do, if there's anything that can be done to help the superintendents in Texas. And he listened to the story, and he said, well, I would recommend that you apply for a waiver. I said, Mr. Secretary, did you miss the part where I said I was from Texas? And he said, oh, yeah, you have a problem. So I, for one, am extremely enthusiastic that now we will have that burden of application for waivers removed from our shoulders, because it was clearly an onerous task. There were winners and losers. You were either friendly with the administration or you were not, or your governor was friendly with the administration or it was not. But the real losers were the kids, the teachers, the schools. And as a consequence, my understanding is at least the bill before us today does lift that burden from us, does it not, Mr. Chairman? Mr. Miller, let me ask you a question. I mean, I haven't served here anywhere near as long as you have, but I've been here for a few terms. And I do recall, of course, in the 2006 election, Republicans lost the majority, Democrats, you became the chairman of the Education and Labor Committee, as I believe it was called at the time. And I recall reading the headlines where we were going to reauthorize No Child Left Behind in 2007, but it never happened. Why was that it never happened?
Couldn't get the politics together.
Well, let me ask you a question. 2 years later, in 2009, not only were you chairman, but you had an overwhelming Democratic majority here in the House of Representatives when some really big, bad laws were passed. The Senate had a 60-vote majority. Why not reauthorize No Child Left Behind in 2009? What was the hurdle that could not be overcome?
There was a lot of hurdles there was a lot of opposition to the legislation. This has not been an easy task. As I said, we've run it out in a bipartisan fashion. We've tried to run it individually, and we haven't been able to clear that hurdle. I mean, that's the challenge you face even today with this legislation that's before you.
Mr. Chairman, I would just allow as to how two of my three children are teachers. One is very much to the left of me, one is very much to the right of me, even though that's a fairly narrow shard of real estate that he occupies. Sunday dinner, they both turn on me because of No Child Left Behind. It is despised by the left, it is despised by the right. So am I missing something today that we are getting out from underneath some of the burden aspects of No Child Left Behind? Shouldn't this be a great day for educators in this country?
Well, it depends what you do when you get out. You're asking me?
Yes, well, I'm asking both of you.
You have to. The question is then what replaces that? If you were to go back pre No Child Left Behind.
Well, we know what replaces it.
No.
We have it in front of us.
Well, but I'm worried about, and what the opposition to this legislation is worried about, we go back to a system with little or no accountability. And at that time, we had English learners learning at reading and math in fourth grade level about 6 or 7%. And we don't want to go back there. We had, as I said, people, whole populations were not counted. One of the things we required, it sounds very onerous, that 95% of the students take the exam. The reason we did that is because on exam days, many schools and school districts would take the kids to the zoo, tell their parents this is the time you want to take them to the doctors, what have you, so they could pare down the number of children. Remember, No Child Left Behind asked a very simple question. At the end of the fourth grade, were these students reading at fourth grade level? How many were and how many weren't? And at the end of fifth grade, we asked another question. How many of these children are reading at fifth grade level? Most parents think when they send their children to school, they get a year's growth, if you will, in proficiency for a year's time.
May I
And
may I interrupt?
It's a very simple question.
But may I
appreciate people didn't like it being asked,
because they've been fudging the
Well, let me-
figures so long about how well their schools were doing, and they were embarrassed.
But here's the difficulty that our schools were having locally. It was not equitable the way students were counted. A child might count one time. And if you pass the test, that would be, he or she passed the test, that would be one, okay, one passed. But a child could count 4 times if they failed the test. We gave our educators at home an almost impossible task to overcome. That coupled with language proficiency in 1 year's time, and with all due respect, I mean, whether a child has just arrived from Mexico, Central America, or Somalia, a 1-year requirement for language proficiency that they've got to learn at grade level in English?
You get 3 years on that child.
Well, with all due respect, my superintendents told me that I had,
Attendance wrong, okay? You get
well, it was more than one superintendent. Well, Mr. Klein, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Burgess. The No Child Left Behind has been roundly beat up for some time by probably everybody here, certainly people in my district. But I will say that No Child Left Behind did something I think was pretty important, and we retain it in this bill. And that is, it required schools to report, and it required them to report with disaggregated data so that you knew if there was somebody that was being left behind. Maybe it's a group of minority kids or special needs kids, or you now couldn't hide that anymore. And I'm very sensitive to the observation that the ranking member made here about you can take all the kids to the zoo. And so we retain in this bill a requirement that 95% of the kids be tested. We just leave that accountability piece to the local level. And we take away the AYP, which, with all respect to the bipartisan group that built that bill, as my superintendents and principals, and probably yours, told you when you and I came in the door together here, this is not going to work. I remember them telling me in 2003, in my first year here, that every school is going to be failing. It's not going to work the way this is set up with this federal requirement of AYP. And so we have eliminated that. And I'm sure, to the gentleman from Georgia's point, there was a lot of dancing in the street over that. But we do think it's important that schools report, and they continue to report that disaggregated data so parents and school boards can see what those schools are doing.
Mr. Chairman Klein, let me ask you a question. You made the comment about the dollars following the student. I have a teacher in my district who teaches a talented, gifted program. He's got a real concern. Kids of means, obviously, in a talented, gifted program, great. Life's at their doorstep, and the future looks sunny. But a child of limited means who could qualify for these talented and gifted programs, it is sometimes difficult for them to keep pace with their peers. Your concept of the money following the child, will that apply to students who are placed in accelerated programs as well as to students in special needs programs?
We don't have that in the bill. There is some discussion about amendments, which I think you all are going to consider here, and I think that's Title I funding, so be a little bit different.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
Just on that second, it goes kind of the question that the gentleman from Georgia asked you. In the state of Utah and many other states, California is not one of them, though, they have an equalization program, which means the money that comes into the state is then equalized. The money goes, follows the kid. Every kid produces the same amount of money for that particular school. In the federal system, we don't have a distribution policy outside of Title I. The only way you can get there is through Title I in some source. So if you want to try and do any kind of other system that's so the question to this, will some states get something? Probably. But you're correct that it will always be unequal because you get money either through grants or through programs or through Title I. But there is nothing that goes about in an effort to try and equalize it so everyone gets a fair crack at the money. It has to come through a specific grant or proposal. And therefore, you're accurate. It will always be different. And there will be, as you said earlier, winners and losers in that.
Well, some of it's formula, if I could.
So there was, though, an attempt when we tried to come up with, you all tried to come up with a bill that gave money to districts for school construction, green construction it was. And yet, the original one, Representative Chandler tried to come up with a formula to try and determine who got the greatest need. couldn't be worked, so the money went out based on Title I. That's one of the problems that we have, is the money coming from the Federal Government will always come by some kind of distribution mechanism, but there is no kind of universal system that many states actually have. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman for the clarification, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back some. I want to thank all the members of the committee, but in particular the two members that were our guests today for not only their time, but the participation that they enabled us to take part in this. And I want to thank both of them. I look forward to seeing both of them on the floor, and this committee will do its best, darndest, to make sure we get something to you where you can get that done. You're now both excused. Thank you very much. The Chairman recognizes that occasionally we try and stick to what I might call a regular order process. I'm going to bypass that for just a minute if I can. The gentleman, I'd like to call up the next panel, which is two people. The gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, who has most faithfully been here for several hours, recognizing that the Rules Committee used to be done with this work in a few minutes and now takes hours. And I do appreciate and respect the gentleman has business that he needs to attend to, as many of us do. And the gentlewoman, Ms. Hanabusa, for the purpose of them offering an amendment to speak on that. Without objection, both you would be, anything you provide us in writing will be included into the record. Gentlemen, one of the senior members of our conference from Alaska, my dear friend, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I get very frustrated. You know, I had ADS when I was a young kid. It's called attention deficiency syndrome. And to listen to debating of the bill is sometimes very frustrating. I just want you all to know that. I know it's very important. I actually learned a little today. I was an educator for 11 years, so I know somewhat I'm speaking of. I have not been happy to leave no child behind. I just know there's been good ideas and good thoughts. But consequently, I do think it's time to look and see if we can't solve some of those problems. My interest here is you have a rule that allows Amendment 55, who myself and the Hawaiian delegation are united on, primarily because we don't have under the present bill being proposed is a block grant. And the block grants are actually BIA education grants. We don't participate in that in Alaska or Hawaii. We had a program that's very unique, and it's worked greatly in Alaska and Hawaii. It is an education program that has been very beneficial to the Alaska natives and the Hawaiian natives. It works well, and as I told the chairman and we had the discussion, this is not the time to mess with something that works and leave no child behind. It's a success story. I've watched the educational level of my Center to Leave No Child Behind in the Native community increase dramatically. And so I am saying we ought to allow the Amendment 55 to come to the floor. I hope we can convince with the Hawaiian delegation and myself that this is the right thing to do. Don't mess something that's working well, and adopt that amendment, and then see if we can improve upon the bill that's being proposed by Chairman Klein. I will tell you one thing that concerns me about Leave No Child Behind. I don't know, I may be wrong, I can be corrected. A state doesn't have to be involved in that bill. They don't have to. They just don't get any money. And that's I call it the procuring of a state. The gentleman from Florida mentioned that. They didn't have to take the money. So I understand the need for trying to get education higher. I love charter schools. My grandkids go to charter schools. I have a disability grandson, 17 years old now, is getting good education, which I'm very pleased with. And so I'm just suggesting let our amendment be in order. Let's go to the floor and we'll debate it, and we'll see if we can't win it. If we don't win it, then we'll see what happens down the road.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Gentlewoman from the Aloha State is welcome to the Rules Committee. We're delighted that you are here and you've chosen a good partner. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for the fact that my good friend's seniority somehow managed to help us again.
Not soon enough, but that's okay.
Thank you, members of the committee, for permitting us to be here on behalf of Amendment Number 55. What the my chair from the IANA Committee on Natural Resources also stated is very true. But it is also founded on a very important premise, and that is that we have a situation here based on trust responsibilities. Both situations are based on basically a fiduciary relationship, which both the government has always recognized that it has to Native Alaskans, Native Americans, as well as the Native Hawaiians. What the bill, Amendment 55, does is to restore it back to what it used to be, which is Title VII. It is also, we have also amended this bill in a way that we have made it germane to the topic before us, and we believe that we would like to, at the very minimum, have this be found in order so that the members of the Congress, of the House of Representatives, can determine and vote on the issue of whether these trust responsibilities would continue. And that's basically it. That's what we're here to get, is to have the members, our colleagues, vote on whether or not the trust responsibilities of the Native people, of all Native people in the United States, will be continued to be recognized in this very critical area of education. There is no question at all, that the Native peoples have had difficulties, and it is through these special programs that we have been able to address it by having what was Title VII and what we're proposing in Amendment 55, that it becomes Title VI. And by doing that, we can continue to have those trust obligations fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. Let me see if any member has any questions.
I want to thank you both. I want to thank you for your patience. Prescription drugs sometimes help, but I hope that your amendment is made in order, and I certainly will support it on the floor if it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all very much, and I appreciate your patience too. And if you'd like to leave, you're welcome to do so. If you want to stay, you're welcome.
I just want my amendment made, our amendment made in order. That's all. Very simple.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have some other folks who've been very patient, so I'd like to ask Congressman Salmon, Congressman Thompson, Congresswoman Brooks, Congresswoman Esty, and Congressman Gibson. I don't know if you all can all fit at the table, but if you can, then and I think the chairman would go back to regular order, which would be to recognize the members of the committee first. And so I'll start with Mr. Salmon, then Mr. Thompson, then Ms. Brooks, Mr. Gibson, and then Ms. Esty. Is that okay?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. There are very few pieces of legislation I downright get excited about, but I think this legislation repealing, I think, one of the worst things that's been done in education in a long time, the Leave No Child Behind Act, or replacing it with common sense measures, putting parents and teachers and school boards back in charge again by giving them the maximum flexibility that this bill provides, I think is very, very appreciated. My daughter is a school teacher, and it's very difficult today to manage the multiplicity of responsibilities a school teacher has. And so I'm really pleased with where this has gone, but I'd like to see it go one step further. In Title I, I'd like to see the flexibility, as Mr. Bishop said in his remarks, to allow the dollars to follow the child within Title I. I understand that our majority leader is going to be putting forward an amendment to allow the portability of those dollars to follow as long as it's in the public school system. I'd like to go a step further and allow the dollars to follow the child regardless of whether they stay in the public school system or they go in a private school system. I believe that children, especially that come from lower income families, that don't have the kind of choices that families with income and resources do, to be able to place their child in the environment that those children best learn in. It's been said that teachers have different teaching styles. Well, I believe that students have different learning styles. One size fits all just doesn't work. And if we truly do care about the customer, which is the child and the family of that child, then I think we've got to be able to unshackle their hands and give them the opportunity that every child has. If we truly do believe that every child has equal value under the law, then let's put up and shut up, or shut up, and give those children every opportunity. And so I would hope, and as Mr. Bishop has said as well, that we would make an amendment in order that we are offering, and that would be to expand Title I funds to be able to be portable for the child, regardless of where that child ends up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Appreciate the opportunity to present. My amendment is number 45. Number 45. Chairman Klein, I'm proud to serve on the Education Workforce Committee. I have a passion for workforce, for education and workforce. And the chairman noted that we do not want to pick winners and losers in education policy. Well, I couldn't agree more, but quite frankly, it's too late under the current No Child Left Behind. My amendment corrects what I believe, I choose to believe, an unintended consequence, an unintended flaw to the formula of Title I funding. It is widely accepted that the poverty level of a child's family is much more likely to be associated with educational disadvantage if the family lives in an area with high proportions of poor families. And that is why the Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act establishes grants to districts to combat the effects of poverty upon children, upon our children. Unfortunately, the formula applies a weighting based on population, not concentration of poverty, for which Title I is designed to offset.
Mr. Salmon?
This number weighting redirects funds away from all smaller districts, both urban and rural, regardless of their poverty rate, and towards a handful of the largest districts, again, solely based upon population, not concentration of poverty. The Thompson, Slaughter, Petri, Barletta, Hanna, and Kelly amendment will ensure that Title I dollars are distributed in a manner consistent with the original congressional intent, and helps deliver Title I dollars to those schools with the highest percentages of students living in poverty. Now, my bipartisan amendment would simply dial back the effects of number weighting applied to these formulas, leveling out the effects over 4 years. I'm a former school board member. I don't want to take any school district off a fiscal cliff. And quite frankly, as a former board chair for many years, for a 4-year phase-in, it works. It reaffirms that all children should be treated equally under the law. Congress has a responsibility to address this as we look towards reauthorization of ESEA. This amendment is germane and has bipartisan support from members on the Committee of Jurisdiction. The amendment has the support of several education advocates from across the political spectrum, including the American Association of School Administrators, the National Alliance of Black School Educators, the Farm Bureau, the Farmers Union, Save the Children, the National PTA, and several state associations. Making this amendment in order will reaffirm that this body is capable of debating substantive issues, and we as legislators can put policy ahead of politics. This is not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This is about the kids, the children, parents, teachers, administrators, and those who have sent us here to have an open and transparent debate before the people's House. Now, I respectfully request this committee to look fairly upon this amendment and allow the House to have the opportunity to correct a flawed formula by distributing grants based upon poverty, not politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Brooks?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to the committee. I, too, am on the Education Workforce Committee, and I do believe that the Student Success Act is a very good bill that does create the flexibility that our states and local school boards can use to best serve our students. My amendment number 5 which was also originally co-sponsored by Congressman Polis, and I appreciate his participation in this, simply makes clarifying changes to H.R. 5. This amendment will add STEM education, including specifically computer science, in Title II, the teacher preparation title, and Title III, the parental engagement title. This clarifies that federal funds may be used to support training and teaching of teachers for computer science and STEM subjects in K-12 education, and that these funds can be used for teacher professional development. It does not cost taxpayers one additional penny, and it wouldn't impose any new mandates on state or localities. It simply provides additional flexibility to educators as they choose how to spend their federal education dollars. Right now, with our 7.6% national unemployment rate, there are thousands of jobs in this country that remain unfilled. And they remain unfilled because we do not have a qualified workforce for these jobs. And that is because, in large part, the K-12 classrooms have not provided the ample opportunity for students in this 21st century knowledge-based economy to learn computer science or many of the STEM fields. This situation is going to become much more serious, and by 2020, it's expected that half of the 9.2 million U.S. STEM jobs will be computing or IT-related jobs. So if we don't provide much greater access to computer science education, these jobs will either remain unfilled or be sent to employees overseas or bring those employees in. Computing in the core and the information technology industry council are supportive of this. So this bill is about training a new generation of innovators. It requires new skills that are currently not being taught in our classrooms, and computer science is one of those skills. So empowering our superintendents, principals, and educators to provide this robust computer science curriculum will ensure that our students are prepared to enter the workforce with the tools they need to succeed. So I am asking that our amendment be found in order. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gibson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the committee. Honored to be with you today, and I'm offering amendment number 35. This is an effort that really brings my district together, the left and right, teachers, parents, administrators, has to do with the subject of testing. And in this amendment, a pretty simple amendment, it's not even a half page. What we're doing in this amendment is changing the floor, the federal floor, from the annual testing requirement to the grade span requirement, which is currently in existence for science. We're making this move so in the grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then 10, 11, and 12, there will be one testing requirement for each one of the grade spans. This is something that, listening carefully to the 165 towns that I represent, about 100 or so school districts, this is something that teachers have expressed to me, parents have expressed to me, administrators have expressed to me. They support this effort. And, as somebody who's lived the life of accountability in the United States military, and 3 of the 24 years in the Army had the opportunity to teach at the United States Military Academy at West Point, I understand accountability and academia as well. I respectfully submit this amendment to the Rules Committee. I hope it will be ruled in order and we'll have an opportunity to debate it on the floor. I know that there are strong views in every direction on this. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Esty?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Slaughter, all the members of the committee for your patience as well with us, and I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to testify on my very simple but important amendment to H.R. 5. That is Amendment 40 in your packet. I'm offering my amendment with my colleagues, Congresswoman DeLauro, Congressman Larson, Congressman Courtney, and Congressman Hines, the entire Connecticut delegation. We've come together as a delegation to provide an opportunity for schools to access federal funds to rebuild, renovate, or repair their facilities if that facility had its learning environment disrupted due to a violent or traumatic crisis that took place on campus, and if the local educational agency deems this action necessary to provide an appropriate learning environment. This amendment would expressly create the allowable use of funds under the local competitive grant program. Since December 14th of this past year, Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown has not been used. on that tragic day when we lost 20 innocent school children, ages 6 and 7, and 6 brave and dedicated educators. The families of this community have been tested to the limits of human grief. As this community attempts to heal, the learning environment inside that school, as you can imagine, has been forever disrupted. Students and teachers are now housed in a neighboring school district, and the community, as communities in my district, I'm sure in your districts, are proud to build schools and proud of their schools. However, when major tragedies strike, especially ones that cannot be predicted, there's an appropriate role for the Federal Government. For natural disasters, the Stafford Act assists with those rebuilding efforts. And under the current Early and Secondary Education Act, the SERVE grant provides Federal assistance after a traumatic violent event for mental health counseling. This amendment, number 40, would allow local communities to apply for a local competitive grant that would serve their unexpected and thus unbudgeted needs for replacing a school when it was too traumatic and disruptive for student success to ask those educators and those students to return to the classroom. This amendment would not help just Newtown. In fact, many of your home states, New York, Georgia, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Florida, and Colorado, have also experienced traumatic school shootings. Similar language has already been included in the Senate version of the ESCA reauthorization during the HELP Committee's markup. Madam Chairman, I respectfully request that this committee make the amendment in order to help the small, brave community heal and to apply for Federal funding for their most important current need for their students to help the Newtown students move forward. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Nugent, any questions? Do you all have any questions?
I do. I do want to say
Ranking Member Slaughter.
thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate so much, Mr. Thompson, you're doing this amendment. It's so important and so fair. I bet we don't get to see it on the floor. But in any case, I'm delighted to have been a co-sponsor of this. What we're trying to do here is redress a serious wrong, and I think the best way that I could explain to you how wrong it is, the formula for disadvantaged pupils has been changed so much that if we were to get this amendment passed and they had to change it, my district in the next 3 years, 14 to 17, would get $11 million more dollars. Now, put the other way, we are losing $11 million in our district because of the way this formula has been changed. And while we want to do is go back to the way it was intended, Western New York has suffered mightily. One of the poorest cities in the country right now is Buffalo. And because of the way this formula has been really rewritten and reconfigured, we have suffered. So I really hope that if